So welcome everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Episode 14. We're going with 14. 12 will never be discussed again until we're allowed to. Have you ever listened to the Horn Section podcast?
No. Oh, on the
So
list.
Alex Horn and his band, the comedian, they do a podcast. It's largely my stupid humour, and they've been talking about the potato episode.
Oh.
For months. Is this the potato episode? No, that was not finished yet. And it's been like, it's almost a running joke, really.
Okay.
So it could end up being a bit like our episode 12.
Yeah. You know? People will be like, what was in it? We'll go, one day we'll sit and tell it.
Indeed. How's your week been?
Good. Yeah. I am hearing from a lot of coaches that the pace has picked up. Obviously there's more bits and pieces on TV, which is great sports wise. Recorded the coach along, the UK coach along. So we did a league of their own, dodgeball next week. That's been a nice little project. The girls lost, West Ham girls lost to Birmingham. No, that's incorrect. They didn't lose. They drew to Birmingham, but they were winning. So part of it was like a little bit of a loss. But yeah, but listen, I'm delighted that I'm able to get in and get on pitch side, you know, when things aren't back and people aren't allowed in. So yeah, there's a lot of hard work happening there. What about your week? What was on the agenda?
Normal stuff, really. Worky stuff. Some interviews for a job that we've had internally, which were good. Some really, really good people. Lots of good people. Too many good people. We've only got one job. We could have employed loads of them. So that was great. Cracking on with the coaching philosophy for the club.
Yes.
And I put together a load of role profiles, or started to say, when we're looking at players, and this is the seniors all the way down, but when we're looking at players, these are the kind of things we might be looking for across technical, tactical, physical, psychosocial stuff, behaviours. And I sent them to all the youth coaches and the seniors coaches. And the under-14s coach got back straight to me and was like, right, this is brilliant. That's going to inform my IDPs. He's started to put together now, well, he's already sent me a PowerPoint presentation with, I want players in these positions to be able to do this. So he's off it. Brilliant. He's doing some great stuff. So, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Speaking of nice little things on the back of our handbook, I did a CPD event yesterday with Mindflick on the Spotlight, because I've done the accreditation of the individuals, and it was around teams and working with teams. And what was really interesting was, like, they were looked at Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, which we saw and when we spoke about, and they looked at strengths, and they looked at when they're overplayed and the kind of wriggle room that you need to give people. And so that was in essence one key part that got my head rambling. And I thought, how effective would it be when we do talk about strengths and we share, and people hear them, and then they think about, you know, what I thought my strengths were and what other people think, and how empowering and kind of, you know, encouraging that can be. But also then the overplayed part, you know, like, what does it look like, and how am I coming across when, you know, when my strength or my sweet spot is overplayed. And what I wanted to maybe just briefly look at today, or share in the start, and is like, how do you give people space to make mistakes? So like, if I know I work best at, you know, being collaborative and wanting new projects, and this is cool, but I know if it's the overplayed part for me is that sometimes I might not finish them. I might want to start another project before I see one through or pass it off. So how do you give some people, whether it's in or out of work or in sport and on the pitch, that room to make mistakes and not feel judged? I'm kind of just rambling from yesterday, but I thought that was a really interesting thing, that teams could actually look at their management and their players, talk about their strengths, share with each other, look at what they are at their best. If they're overplayed, they go, by the way, do you know that this is how you are here, but we're going to give you some space to explore that. So if you're that kind of dynamic, kind of skillful, flick on here, flick on there, kind of trying cool things. They're not the right terminology for most sports, but I'm thinking of evasion sport, that like, if it works, I remember, sorry, stupid example now. I remember that we used to do in basketball, at the end of a game, you'd practice this halfway shot thing, right? And you might do it end of training, or it might, you know, one in X amount of games, it might be a scenario, 3, 2, 1, and you let it launch. But there was people who in the game would shoot 3-pointers who never practiced them, and they'd be way out of range, even a good bit beyond. And if it went in, you could hear people going, yay, and the coach going, great shot. I'd be like, that's not a great shot. That's a shot that went in at that moment. They're not a 3-point shooter. Now, a little bit off piece there, but like, how do you give people the wriggle room to work on the things that they believe are strengths or other people believe their strengths are?
It's a tough call, isn't it? Especially in the heat of the battle, because ideally you want people to be doing that in the game when it matters. And I guess that, or in the sport, depending on your perspective. But I can't imagine Justin Thomas walking up the 18th of the Sawgrass last weekend in the Players' Championship golf competition, and he's 120 yards out. He probably then thinks, right, well, I might hit a driver here and just see if I can do something different. Because his caddy, I think, would have just lost it. Almost hundreds of thousands of dollars on this. Just put it on the green and let's walk off. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's got to be a time and a place for it. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, you'll never have that when you need it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably for coaches to create space for people to try stuff that isn't what is normal, maybe.
Maybe it links into our previous episodes where we talked about the practice design and the environment they're in, affording different opportunities and small-sided games, and the freedom to explore their personality and their skill level and the development of that. So yeah, well, thanks.
I just think, so if I am that golf coach and I'm doing some chipping practice around the green with a golfer, I might go, right, well, you've got here, we're going to take 3 shots from this same space, but you've got to take 3 different clubs to get them to explore what it looks like. Yeah. Or we're going to have 3 different lies. I'm going to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this one's all nicely sat up and perfect. Yeah. This one's not so great, and this one I'm going to tread on. But you can pick your club. But again, so we're starting to get, right, well, this is my best club on, but do they overplay it when they know it's not right? Be interesting to see that you kind of play around with those kind of things.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting question that we may have brought up before, but when you get your phone or you get a laptop, like, do you explore the settings on that? Do you change things around and rename things? Yeah, so I had a conversation with someone. I have this multiple times because I think of the default setting thing, but some people don't. Some people just buy the phone and keep it as is. And it brought me there when you said about the golf clubs, because I know there's an element of experience that comes from coaching, and if it is in golf or different sports, that you kind of trust that somebody who's coaching you has the experience to know, well, X amount of percentage people in their lifetime are not Happy Gilmore and have used this club and have done with this. So you kind of go with the norm of it, but what if you do change the settings and you do test out different things and they give you different results? Then like how
but I guess that comes back to the spotlight framework, and the people that are probably quite prudent may well be nervous about changing the settings. Like, what if I break it?
Yeah, true.
I'm like, it's a pretty robust thing, but what if I break it? I don't know what to do. So if you're probably a bit more prudent, you might stay a bit more safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I've had some feedback recently about, I don't know if it's overplaying my strengths, but other people's perception is, because one of the elements of the framework is around forceful, and I sit in that kind of space, and people feeling like they can't challenge me because why would they? And again, so if I want to be more welcoming of feedback, which I do, but other people feel like they can't, that's probably something I've overplayed at some stage. But I remember one of my colleagues at the FA, Steve Brown, he's on the talent ID at Arsenal now, and he said, do people know that, Nick, if they want to challenge you, they've got to have their shit together? I still remember him saying that, but that's something I need to find a way to not make people feel like that. But
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
overplayed somewhere.
I work with you, and I feel that, yeah, you do need to have your stuff together, but isn't that just being smart? Like, isn't that like
Maybe.
me? I think, I don't think that you'd ever be defensive of me coming to you. I think I could pick up the phone and go, hey, I've got an idea. I do think I'd get some sort of disruptive question back for question. I'd be like, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this? And there you go. But I think I wouldn't agree that that's my perception anyway, that you're unapproachable or you couldn't nail something down. But I do think when you do go to anybody to have a conversation, there's, it's useful to be informed. It's useful to have your file together to go, I think this, and this is why, as opposed to, retweet, copy and paste.
Yeah. It was an interesting one. Just made me think.
Yeah.
Made me think. Anyway, we could spend ages on that.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Right. So I saw this tweet earlier on in the week, and I'm interested in your view on it. I mean, you know what's coming because we've discussed what we were going to talk about today, but we haven't discussed what we're going to talk about linked to this. So this is going to be a real honest reflection. So that Steve Kerr embodying his coaching principles by allowing players the opportunity to lead and make decisions. So Steve Kerr, NBA basketball coach, allowing them to take responsibility builds trust, which will strengthen the coach-player relationship. And then Steve Kerr said, many coaches talk the talk, but don't actually walk the walk. Immediate reflections on that.
Okay, I've written down my keywords. I don't think it's groundbreaking. I do think he's right that talk the talk and walk the walk and all that needs to happen more. I don't think people are accountable. And I know one of our earlier episodes, we talked about having critical friends. I do think they're important. And even going back to the feedback, welcoming and opening feedback. I think, leaning towards the invasion, and it's obviously basketball. Steve Kerr grew up with the Chicago Bulls era. Now, from my experience in that 80s period, 90s period, and he may have had, which he did, a depth of experience before that and influence from other coaches. So his experience of growing up in, or a portion of his career in a space with a holistic coach and approach to that, that's where it started. So his transition into a coach had already had a lot of positive experiences, a lot of people, different dynamics around him, different people, where I feel he could bring that experience in, and then he could evaluate it himself. Now, we are talking about an MBA level, but I wrote down where, like, the building trust part. I think that's really interesting, because when I listen to snippets like that, or I hear other Division 1 coaches where they have all scholarship athletes, it is a really different dynamic, different context as far as the willingness and ability to give that over. So yes, am I aware that there's pressure on people's shoulders, as there would be in a professional game, to get the wins and get over the line? But like, why is that a big deal? That's what I think in my head. Like, yes, people can argue back and say, yeah, but they're NBA players. Of course they can make decisions. Can 15-year-olds do that? Well, somebody had to start somewhere with it. And if you don't start asking questions and wait for an answer to hear what they're thinking, how will you gauge how effective what you're doing is? And how will you gauge where they're at in their kind of mental capacity, physical ability? So I do think around the building trust and the make decisions, they're all like nice, good buzzwords, and Steve is grabbing that, and it's a really good tweet, but there's a lot to unpick in that. And I do think in my initial reaction is like, yeah, obviously, let's do it.
So if trust is that foundation, how do you go about developing that?
Well, you see, the trust part for me is a really interesting thing, because in the basics of trust, and I'll probably leave loads out here, like being yourself, being authentic, admitting when you make mistakes, being consistent in what you do. I love the word consistency. I think it just irons out so many things in the mental space, in the psychology space. I think open and effective in your communication. We had Jen on the coach along last night, and she was talking about like communicating, being open, having clear messages, so there's no ambiguity. They're like bringing the best version of yourself. Does it bring trust? It brings an enjoyment to it, and the people in front of you. So all of those things around trust. But one of the things to be very mindful of in my experience is, and even outside the coaching environment, is that like, if you give around autonomy, if you give people too much kind of autonomy or rope, as I usually call it, to like go and play over there and do this and explore that, then I think it can start to fray a little bit and have like, well, you know, where am I in this whole big picture? You know, am I good? Can you give me some more feedback? So I think it's finding a nice balance between the building trust, the pace you're going at, and the relationship that you're actually building and checking in. So some people love this, you know, here's the session today, go off and do it. And they're like, yeah, thanks so much. Others are like, can I change this a little bit? How does this work? So yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, and I think the point that you made about could 15s do it, because these are NBA players, they must be able to do it. Well, why wouldn't they be able to do it? What would stop them being able to have a conversation? I remember working with the under-10s at the academy, and they did, one week we set it all up. So they did the pre-match team talk. I've got videos on my phone still. I have to dig them out. So they did the pre-match team talk. They did the team talk in between each quarters, because we played in quarters. And they did the end of match summary as 9 and 10-year-olds. And I just thought that was like, why wouldn't you do that? That's the norm. So then I see like a message like that about, oh, Steve Kerr's let the players lead a timeout. And I'm like, well, like, and
and what happened?
So why is that groundbreaking? Because if you then think, so typically coaches just tell the players what's happening in that. How long's a timeout? 1 minute, 2 minutes?
Your basketball.
Yeah. So they're very coach led typically, which is probably why Steve Kerr's example looks so different, because it's different to how everybody else does it. So therefore people get a bit excited and a bit gooey by that kind of thing. But it would be like me in a leadership capacity at work, just micromanaging everybody constantly. And then everybody going, oh, Nick's asked my opinion. That's different. I'm like, well, but why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And especially when you've got elite players that are the ones in the game, the ones that are picking up who's hot, who's not, who do I need to double think? Like, they're the ones picking up that quicker than the coaches.
Yeah.
So I just find it really weird when they go, well, yeah, but that's revolutionary. Steve Kerr's allowed the players to have an input and lead it. You know, they've probably done some work on it before, so it shouldn't be anything wow. But I guess if you don't work like that, and you've got to give up some of this power that you have as a coach, it's probably quite hard, I reckon.
Yeah, I think that you've nailed it. That's the key part. I think there's a perception, and maybe we're thankfully moving on from that, where the coach thinks they need to be the be all and end all, and that they're in that on their own. And I have all the answers here. I think we're moving slightly past that. I hope we are, maybe in some sports, not so much at the moment. But I think that the key thing that you've also said there as well is that it won't be the first time. You know, yeah, it could be exploratory with an under 10s group, excuse me, where you could say, right, what do you think? And they're kind of go, oh, yeah. And they'll give you something, it'll be fun. But you'll also revisit that in the next training session. And you'll also start to drip more in and have more silence and listen to what the answers are. And like, I think, Steve Kerr doing that there, let's not be confused, or let's not be bewildered by the whole fact that, he is able to do that because he has a harmonious, that's probably loose, environment that he's created, that like, if their, anxiety is really high, or they're losing and there's pressure on and they're sitting down, like going at each other on the bench, he'll have some tactics in place to, kind of calm them down, or the management will, and then he'll let them lead. Like he'll be professional, and he'll be timely in how he introduces what do you think? Can you, and I think that's a nice snapshot, and that's lovely to get to that point. There's a lot of work that goes into that to get to the relationships, to know who can speak. I mean, and years ago I was involved with a team where you could just see people who weren't managed, and it wasn't talked about in a training session. And then you'd have a halftime break where some players who weren't able to manage the build-up of what was happening, or they were performing really poorly, would then turn around and have an outburst. And they'd be going, come on, do this. And what about that? And we're not doing this. But really, that was just them speaking about their own frustrations. So there's a lot of stuff gone into place there, practice-wise, and training and conversations to get to the point where Steve has there. But it does, I mean, we can be aware of where the pressures for outcome need to be, you know, the pressure to have an outcome at the end of the game is a win. Some people in their ignorance might pinpoint that as the loss. Which if they're leading a timeout, how can they?
Yeah, of course.
You know, it's interesting, you know, really interesting.
But I don't know the point in the game when he did it. So I don't know if they were up, they were down. Was it near the end of a quarter, near the end of the game? I don't know when he did it, and whether, you know, the first time he did it, whether he did it in a safer space, right? They're leading by X amount. You know, it's near the end of the game. I'll let the players take this one, just to kind of gently introduce the players. But it has made me think about me doing it with the under 10s, knowing that what I would get from them leading a team talk, leading some halftime, quarter-time feedback, wouldn't have been brilliant, because it's the first time they've ever done it and they're going to make mistakes, and, you know, but that's why I did it then, so that they would have that opportunity and be exposed to it at a younger age. But what I didn't do well, which I'm now thinking and to try and address with some of my club philosophy type stuff. So I'd worked in that way because I thought it was right for the kids. But if they then go up to the under 11s coach, if I didn't stay with the group, or the under 12s coach, and the under 12s coach doesn't think like that in the slightest, I've now developed some kids that are sat there thinking, well, like, when do I get an opinion? But if they then go through some coaches that never give them an opinion, it's kind of like I've wasted my time doing it, because I haven't supported and affected the coaches above me from a systemic way of thinking as well. So I've just ploughed on going, oh, this is, well, me and the co-coach, you know, so Dell and I that worked together with this group, and Dell was brilliant. He was a great coach to work with because he was so open-minded. But yeah, we've probably failed those kids there because we didn't manage upwards into the full-time staff about it, and other coaches to normalize that behavior.
Yeah.
You know, we just did it. It went well. Yeah, I probably should have done that better.
I mean, that's all part of reflection, isn't it? I mean, the fact that you were at that age allowing them an experience to do that, when possibly at school, broad pain stroke here, possibly at school they weren't being asked a lot of questions, possibly at home they weren't being asked a lot of questions.
Yeah,
and you were saying, you love doing this, do you want to answer, you know, do you want to feed into it? And they're kind of going, well, that was cool, do you remember that coach? So that could be the Steve Kerr moment, where in your scenario, you've enlightened them to something. It hasn't been nourished with other people, but that might stick with them as a positive experience that they'll try and reintroduce later on in coaching, you know. But I know, and we're probably going to be pressed for time, but I won't go into it long, but I am still really keen to explore the whole cognitive load. Like, how do coaches pause, no matter what sport you're in, and think about how much information you are giving your players, your athletes, your people? Like, what do you think they can take on? What do you think they're doing with sentences? Like, you know, we even me, like, we live in a text limited character amount of word on text messages and emails and Twitter, to then go into, like, you know, blurbs of intros to sessions, and, you know, through bouts and through half times and pauses in a game where you're going, and then fix this, you know.
Should we do that next week? Should we get into stoppages?
Oh yeah.
So, before the game starts.
Yeah.
Quarter time, half time, timeout.
Yeah, let's do that.
End of game.
Like a whole timeline.
Yeah.
And let's do one for the coaches as well. Coaches' timeline on their game plan or session plan or competition plan, and the athletes.
And we've never been this planned before.
No, we probably won't do it either. We'll get in and then I'll start rambling about something, and all of a sudden you go, Jen, 20 minutes in.
Yeah, so if you're watching this expecting episode 15 to be all about that, don't bank on it. But
get excited.
But you never know. You never know.
Oh, cool. So
how many people do you reckon spotted the deliberate mistake in the last episode?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see. We can put it out there.
Yeah. We'll go back to normal. Top and tail.
Right. Okay. End of episode already. Join us on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter or email. Let us know what you think of the episodes. If there's any topics that you'd like, we're coming up to the end of the season now. So new season, new ideas coming in for season 2. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for following. And thanks for all the feedback that you're giving us. Coach Convo @CoachConvo is our Twitter handle, and coachconversation@gmail.com. You can find the links below. Have a great week, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.